story about a professor at City University who discovered a rather out there healing technique and decided to test it in the lab. And which in itself was kind of wild. And they gave mice cancer. These are mice that are specially bred to have cancer. I know this is sad for the mice, yeah, but actually I have to tell you that these mice have a happy ending, these particular mice, but I just tell you that so you don't feel too sad. So they give the mice cancer, and then they did the technique, and it almost always reversed the cancer in the mice. They looked a lot sicker for a moment, and then they got better. And here's what's interesting. When they re-injected them with cancer, they could no longer get it. Their immune systems had changed, and they couldn't give them the cancer. In this case, it was breast cancer anymore. Now, that professor's name is Dr. Bill Bankston. And I did his course, and I know Bill well, and I have really leaned into him because he's a wise person. And it was his technique that was used, not him doing it. It was someone who studied with him. The initial trials were done with the healer being 2,500 miles away, which provokes a lot of scientific questions because, and they've repeated this 18 times with the same results. So this is clearly, it's an anomalous result, but it's real.
Replicatable.
And now we have to work out why.
Yep.
Yeah, it's replicatable. But there are big questions. What is the transmission wave from the healer to the cells? What happens when the wave meets the cell electromagnetically? There's a lot of questions to answer. And I think this is probably going to be my next book, to be honest, because I think I'm going to go on this journey to try and ask the right questions, such as I can, or find people who know the right questions and then try to answer them. Because that brings us into this idea that we affect each other. Yeah, which we do kind of know, but it starts to measure the way we affect each other, which I'm very interested in. As you know, because you've read Energy Medicine, I'm very interested in the ways we affect each other.
And I freaking loved it. Yeah, and I think, again, we're talking about energy within the body and the chi within the body. And then when you were talking about the narcissistic, hilarious cancer cell, I just think that's like an amazing reference. I was thinking about how what we don't understand is that we are connected to one another through energy just as much as our internal environment is connected to itself. And this is, my clients have laughed before because it might take me 3 or 4 months to start talking about food with them because I'm like, I got to get your social situation, your work situation. I got to know what's going on in your outside of yourself community for me to understand the internal environment that's even occurring. So this idea of energy between people, if I have the vision of what you've laid out, which is the connection component, can you tell me how do we impact each other from an energetic perspective? And how does that, we know work stress can lead to chronic illness, but can you draw a more scientific picture of that for us?
Yes and no. There are still some questions that I think, good science is all about asking the right question, I think. I don't think we have all the answers, but at the University of Connecticut, and I wrote about this in Energy Medicine, they put 2 people in separate MRIs, and when one thought healing thoughts about the other, their brainwaves synced up on MRI. Now they were in different rooms.
Makes me emotional.
And that's wild. But it's also something that we instinctively know is probably right, because I don't know how many times you've thought about someone and then have them text you, but it happens a lot, does it not? I mean, for me, it's often a patient I haven't seen for like a decade, and I think about them out of nowhere, and sure enough, they're on my schedule the next week. I somehow heard them.
Absolutely.
So I'm really interested in how we communicate non-verbally and sort of what would loosely be called energetically with each other. In Energy Medicine, I also wrote about some really interesting studies at Princeton in the engineering department, where they had a grad student, who wanted to create a machine that could be moved by the human mind. And Dr. Jean, who was the dean at that point of engineering at Princeton, didn't think for a moment that she'd pull it off but he thought it was an interesting intellectual exercise for a grad student to, break it down and see. Well, she did pull it off as it happened. And to cut a long story very short, thanks to decaying atomic material, she created a random number generator that spat out random numbers. And what they found was that when people focused on the machine with the same emotion, well, not really on the machine, but focused together with the same general emotion, the machine came into order. The numbers became less random. And the more people, the less random it became. And so to give you an example, on September the 11th, by that time, Princeton had set up a lab to look at this called the Pear Lab. And they had computers all over at universities all over the world spitting back random numbers to Princeton for them to monitor what happens as the world changes. And on September the 11th, they all came into line all over the world as we all stopped what we were doing and looked in the same direction. And that is kind of extraordinary. Now, something that I still have questions about is that they started to come into order before it happened, about 4 hours before.
Whoa.
And I don't know. Mm-hmm. Yes, I think we need to talk to some physicists about this. This may be about the non-linear nature of time at that level. It may be that this had already started in so much as the people with the malevolent intent were already on their way to the airport. That could be part of it. I don't know the answer to that, but that's part of the data, is that they started to come into line before those planes hit the Twin Towers and the Pentagon. And then they were very in line. And then they dropped away in other parts of the world. And we all stayed somewhat connected in New York, because, of course, it was very real for us at the time. I lived in New York during that time, and it was literally all we could think about.
I lived in New York, too.
So here's what we know. We can measure the effect of our consciousnesses integrating. And we can, but I'm not sure we understand completely the wave. There must be an informational carrier wave of some sort. And I've talked to a lot of scientists about it, and there are lots of theories, torsion, scalar waves, all sorts of things. But I think that's our next frontier. We have to be able to identify and measure the way information is carried. But there is no doubt that we affect each other. And we know it. It makes sense to us. We've all had the experience. Totally. If you walk into a room where there's been an argument, you can feel it, can't you? Even though everybody may be looking normal, you feel the tension in the air. Likewise, if you walk into a temple or a church or a mosque, they often feel extraordinarily peaceful. And I think that's thousands of years of people being on their best behavior while, communing with their maker or their higher power. Yeah. And you start to feel it in the building. And so we have more questions than answers, but I think we're on our way to identifying the right questions to ask so we can answer them and find, information that I think will change us. And I think the pandemic made us somewhat isolated, and we saw people suffer, didn't we? You made this point in your question, but we're calibrating each other just like those cancer cells were calibrating.
Totally.
Chinese medicine has always had a method of explaining this, which is that the qi, that is the intelligence that flows through your body and creates coherent communication, is part of something bigger called the Tao, which is our collective consciousness that we emerged from.